My name is Miguel Reyes, and I'm 26 years old, working as an architect for a small urban planning firm here in Chicago. Most days, I sketch blueprints for affordable housing projects and volunteer with community redevelopment groups in neighborhoods that remind me of where I grew up. It's honest work, the kind that lets me sleep well at night, but it doesn't pay much. That's never bothered me, because I learned early that money isn't everything, a lesson my father never understood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I was finishing a particularly long shift, reviewing plans for a community center on the south side, when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I hadn't seen in over 5 years. The message was brief, formal, like a business meeting invitation. Miguel, dinner tomorrow, 7 p.m., Chez Laurent downtown. Important guests. Don't disappoint me. Victor. Victor. My father. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my hands trembling slightly. 5 years of silence, and this was how he reached out? No, how are you? No acknowledgement of the birthdays he'd missed, the graduations he'd skipped, the phone calls that went unanswered. Just a command, wrapped in the cold efficiency that had defined our relationship since I was a child. The last time I saw Victor Reyes was at my college graduation. He'd shown up in an expensive suit, shaken my hand like I was a business associate, and left before the reception. That was it. No pride in his eyes, no warmth in his voice. Just the same disappointed look he'd given me when I chose architecture over business, when I decided to work with communities instead of corporations. I walked home to the small apartment I shared with my grandmother, Abuela Carmen, the woman who had truly raised me. She was in the kitchen, as always, humming softly while she prepared dinner. At 78, she moved with the careful grace of someone who had worked with her hands her entire life, her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, her dark eyes still sharp and kind. "Mijo," she said without turning around, somehow sensing my presence, "you look troubled." I showed her the text, watching as she read it carefully, her lips pursing slightly. Carmen Reyes had never learned to read perfectly, but she understood people better than anyone I'd ever met. She set down her wooden spoon and studied my face. "He wants something," I said, voicing what we both knew. "Perhaps," she replied, her voice steady. "Or perhaps he's finally ready to be a father." I wanted to laugh at her optimism, but I couldn't. This was the woman who had held me when I cried about my father's absence, who had worked double shifts as a seamstress to pay for my school supplies, who had never once spoken ill of the man who had abandoned us both. "I don't know if I should go, Abuela." She turned to face me fully, her weathered hands reaching up to cup my face. "Family is still family, Miguel, even when it hurts." After a long moment, I made my decision. "If I go, you're coming with me." Her eyebrows raised in surprise. "Mijo, I don't think." "No," I said firmly. "If Victor wants to see me, he sees the woman who actually raised me. You're my family, Abuela. You're coming with me." She smiled then, that gentle smile that had been my anchor through every storm. "Está bien, mijo. We'll face whatever comes together." The next evening, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of my only decent shirt for the third time. It was a simple white button-down I'd bought for job interviews, paired with khakis that had seen better days in the one tie I owned. Next to me, Abuela Carmen smoothed down her navy blue dress, the same one she wore to church every Sunday. She had wrapped her shoulders in a delicate cream shawl that had belonged to her mother, and, despite its age, it looked elegant against her silver hair. "You look beautiful, Abuela," I said, meaning every word. She squeezed my hand. "And you look like the good man I raised." The drive downtown felt longer than usual, Chicago's skyline growing taller and more intimidating with each mile. Chez Laurent sat in the heart of the financial district, its glass facade gleaming under the streetlights. Even from the outside, I could see the crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in white linen. A valet in a crisp burgundy uniform approached our 10-year-old Honda Civic with barely concealed amusement. His eyes lingered on the small dent in the passenger door. the faded paint on the hood. When I handed him the keys, he glanced at the restaurant's entrance, then back at our car, as if calculating whether we'd made some kind of mistake. "We're dining at Chez Laurent," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Of course, sir," he replied, though his smirk suggested otherwise. "We'll take good care of your vehicle." The hostess inside was polished perfection personified, her blonde hair swept into an immaculate chignon, her black dress probably worth more than my monthly rent. She looked us up and down with the practiced eye of someone trained to identify who belonged and who didn't. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone suggesting she already knew the answer. "We're with the Reyes party," I said. Her demeanor shifted slightly, though not necessarily for the better. "Ah, yes, you must be Miguel. Right this way." She led us through a dining room that felt like stepping into another world. The ceiling soared above us, supported by marble columns that gleamed under the soft lighting. Every table was perfectly set, with multiple forks, crystal wine glasses, and flowers that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. The other diners looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Women in designer dresses that sparkled when they moved. Men in suits that fit like they'd been tailored by angels. I felt Abuela Carmen's steady presence beside me, her posture straight and dignified as always. If she was intimidated by the opulence around us, she didn't show it. Instead, she seemed to be taking it all in with the same gentle curiosity she showed when we visited the art museum together. "Lovely architecture," she murmured to me, nodding toward the intricate moldings on the ceiling. "Someone took great care with this place." Then I saw him. Victor Reyes stood at a round table near the restaurant's center, his back straight and his silver hair perfectly styled. At 52, he had aged into the kind of distinguished handsomeness that opened doors and impressed investors. His charcoal suit probably cost more than I made in a month, and his gold watch caught the light as he gestured while speaking to the other guests at the table. When he saw us approaching, his smile faltered for just a moment. His eyes moved from me to Carmen, and I caught something flicker across his face. Annoyance. Maybe even embarrassment. "Miguel," he said, extending his hand for a firm handshake that felt more like a business transaction than a father greeting his son. "You made it." "Victor," I replied, refusing to call him Dad. That title had to be earned. His attention shifted to Carmen, and I watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Mother," he said with forced politeness, "I didn't realize you were joining us." "I hope that's not a problem," Carmen replied softly, her voice carrying the same gentle strength it always had. "Miguel asked me to come." Before Victor could respond, a woman appeared at his side like she'd materialized from the shadows. She was stunning in that calculated way that came from money and time. Perfectly highlighted hair, flawless makeup, and a red dress that hugged her figure in all the right places. Her smile was bright and sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. "You must be Miguel," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm Celeste Moreno, Victor's business partner." I shook her hand, noting how her eyes lingered on my off-the-rack shirt before sliding over to Carmen with barely disguised disdain. "And this must be—" Celeste paused, as if she couldn't quite figure out how to categorize my grandmother. "This is Carmen Reyes," I said firmly, "my grandmother." "Oh," Celeste's smile widened, but it didn't reach her eyes. "How? Nice! It's so sweet that you brought your grandmother along. Very traditional." The way she said traditional made it sound like a disease. Victor gestured toward the table. "Please, sit. I'd like you to meet some important guests." As we approached, two other people rose from their seats. The man was tall and distinguished, with graying temples and the kind of confident bearing that came from a lifetime of success. The woman beside him was elegant in an understated way, her jewelry expensive but not flashy, her smile warm but reserved. "Miguel, I'd like you to meet Dr. Malcolm Stern and his wife, Alicia," Victor said, his voice taking on the practiced charm he used for business. "They're considering investing in my latest venture." Dr. Stern extended his hand with a firm grip. "Pleasure to meet you, Miguel. Your father's told us you're an architect." "That's right," I said, grateful that Victor had at least mentioned my profession. I work in urban planning, focusing on affordable housing and community development. I caught the slight raise of Alicia Stern's eyebrows, as if she hadn't expected such an answer. And this is my grandmother, Carmen Reyes, I continued, placing my hand gently on Carmen's shoulder. Dr. Stern's expression softened immediately. Mrs. Reyes, it's an honor. He took Carmen's hand in both of his manner shifting to one of genuine respect. Please, have a seat. Quote, as we settled around the table, I noticed how the seating arrangement seemed designed to isolate Carmen and me. Victor had positioned himself between us and the Sterns, with Celeste flanking his other side like a bodyguard. Carmen and I were relegated to the far end of the table, close enough to be present but far enough to be marginalized. A server appeared almost instantly, a young Latino man with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. He filled our water glasses with practiced precision, and I caught him offering Carmen a particularly warm smile as he poured. Good evening, he said softly. My name is Luis, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink? Victor immediately took charge, ordering a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my car payment. We'll have the 2018 Chateau Margaux, he said with the casual confidence of someone who threw around such names regularly. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Excellent choice, sir, Luis replied, though his eyes lingered on Carmen for a moment longer than necessary, as if he recognized her from somewhere. As Luis disappeared to fetch the wine, Victor rose from his seat, adjusting his cufflinks with theatrical precision. The man who had once read me bedtime stories, though those memories felt like they belonged to someone else entirely, now stood before us like a stranger performing on a stage. Before we begin our meal, he announced, his voice carrying across our section of the restaurant, I'd like to make a toast. The wine arrived with perfect timing, Luis expertly uncorking the bottle and offering Victor a taste. After his approving nod, Luis filled each glass with the burgundy liquid that caught the candlelight like liquid rubies. Victor raised his glass, and the rest of the table followed suit, though I noticed Carmen simply held hers gently, waiting. To success, Victor began, his voice smooth and practiced. 5 years ago, I took a leap of faith and started my own consulting firm. Tonight, I'm proud to say that Reyes Strategic Solutions has become one of Chicago's premier business development companies. He paused, letting his accomplishment hang in the air like expensive cologne. We've helped over 50 companies streamline their operations, increase their profits, and expand their market reach. Dr. Stern nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by the numbers. But more than that, Victor continued, his chest swelling with pride, I've built something that will last. A legacy that represents the very best of what determination and vision can achieve. I felt my stomach tighten. Legacy. The word sat bitter in my mouth because I knew what he meant and what he didn't. His legacy apparently didn't include the son he'd abandoned or the mother who had raised that son when he couldn't be bothered. Celeste rose gracefully, her red dress catching the light. If I may add something, she said, her voice honey-sweet but with an edge that reminded me of broken glass. Victor's success represents something beautiful, generational progress, the ability to rise above one's circumstances and create something truly extraordinary. Her eyes flicked toward Carmen and me when she said rise above one's circumstances, and I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Carmen, however, remained perfectly composed, her glass held steady in her weathered hands. To the future, Celeste continued, and to leaving the past where it belongs. They all drank, even the Sterns, though Alicia's expression seemed somewhat reserved. I lifted my glass to my lips, but barely tasted the wine. Carmen took a small sip, then set her glass down with careful precision. I cleared my throat, feeling the weight of the silence that followed. I'd like to say something about Carmen. That's not necessary, Victor interrupted smoothly, his smile never wavering but his eyes hard as steel. I'm sure everyone here appreciates family, Miguel. Let's focus on the future tonight. The dismissal stung more than I expected. I looked at Carmen, who simply smiled and raised her glass slightly, as if toasting something invisible to the rest of us. "To family," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. But somehow, it carried more weight than all of Victor's grand pronouncements. The appetizers arrived like small works of art, delicate constructions that looked too beautiful to eat. I watched Carmen examine her plate with the same careful attention she gave to her sewing, appreciating the craftsmanship, even if she'd never seen anything quite like it before. The conversation flowed around luxury and success, like water finding its level. Victor regaled the Sterns with stories of his recent business trips to London and Tokyo, while Celeste interjected with anecdotes about the high-profile clients they'd acquired. Their words painted pictures of private jets and five-star hotels, of board meetings in corner offices with views of the city skyline. "We just closed a deal with Harrison Industries," Victor said, cutting into his foie gras with surgical precision. "Helped them restructure their entire supply chain. Saved them $8 million in the first quarter alone." "Impressive," Dr. Stern replied, though he seemed more interested in his food than Victor's accomplishments. I found myself shrinking further into my chair, my own work suddenly feeling insignificant by comparison. What was designing affordable housing compared to saving multinational corporations millions of dollars? What was community development next to international business deals? Then Victor's attention turned to me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Miguel here works in, what do you call it again, urban planning?" Victor's tone was indulgent, the way you might discuss a child's hobby. "Very idealistic work. He designs housing for people who can't afford much." The way he said it made my passion sound like charity work, something admirable but ultimately inconsequential. "That's important work," Alicia Stern said, and I caught something genuine in her voice. "Cities need people who care about all their residents, not just the wealthy ones." I felt a spark of gratitude toward her. "It is important to me," I said, finding my voice. "I volunteer with community redevelopment groups, too. We're working on a project right now that will bring a community center to a neighborhood that hasn't had one in 20 years. "How wonderful," Celeste said, her smile as sharp as ever. "It must be so fulfilling to help the less fortunate." Less fortunate. The phrase hung in the air like a judgment, and I felt Carmen shift slightly beside me. The conversation meandered through topics I could barely follow: stock options and market fluctuations, vacation homes in the Hamptons, and ski trips to Aspen. With each story, the distance between my world and theirs seemed to grow wider, like a chasm opening in the middle of the table. Then, without warning, the conversation took a turn that changed everything. "Speaking of expensive tastes," Victor said, swirling his wine with practiced elegance, "I suppose we should address the elephant in the room." He gestured toward the opulent dining room around us. "Dining at a place like this isn't exactly accessible to everyone. The prices here could feed a family for a week." He chuckled at his own observation, and I felt my stomach clench with growing dread as I sensed where this was heading. "I mean, let's be honest," Victor continued, his voice growing louder with wine and confidence. "At least most of us don't have to worry about the bill tonight." "Well," his eyes landed on Carmen with deliberate precision. "Most of us, anyway. She probably can't even afford to eat at a place like this, can you, Mother?" The room fell into an awkward silence that seemed to stretch for eternity. Celeste let out a soft chuckle, then quickly sipped her wine. The Sterns looked uncomfortable, their eyes darting between Victor and Carmen. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, anger and shame battling in my chest. I started to open my mouth to defend her, but Carmen placed a gentle hand on my arm. She looked directly at Victor, her dark eyes steady and calm. "I've paid for more meals than you can imagine, Mijo," she said softly. I excused myself from the table, needing air, needing space to process what had just happened. In the hallway leading to the restrooms, I nearly collided with Luis, our server, who was carrying a tray of empty glasses. "I'm sorry," I said, steadying myself against the wall. "No problem at all," Luis replied, then paused, studying my face. "Are you all right? You look upset." I started to brush off his concern, but something in his kind eyes made me stop. "It's family stuff," I said finally. Luis glanced toward our table, then back at me. The lady with you, Carmen Reyes, is she your grandmother? I nodded, surprised. You know her? A smile spread across Luis's face. She helped my family years ago. I was 17, and my mother was struggling to pay rent after my father got hurt at work. We were about to be evicted. He shook his head, as if still amazed by the memory. Mrs. Reyes showed up at our door one evening. She said she'd heard about our situation through the church. She paid 3 months of rent, no questions asked, no expectations of repayment. My eyes widened. Carmen had never mentioned this to me. She told my mother, "We help each other, that's how we survive," Luis continued. My mom cried for an hour after she left. Mrs. Reyes probably saved us from becoming homeless. I felt a lump forming in my throat. She never told me. That doesn't surprise me, Luis said. She's helped more people than that man at your table ever will. And she does it quietly, without fanfare or recognition. He paused, glancing back toward the dining room. Real power doesn't need to announce itself. I stood there for a moment, processing his words. When I returned to the table, I felt different, lighter somehow, but also more grounded. I looked at Carmen with new eyes, seeing not just my grandmother who had raised me, but a woman who had touched countless lives in ways I was only beginning to understand. The main course had arrived during my absence, elaborate presentations of beef and seafood that looked more like sculptures than food. Victor was in the middle of another story about a recent business deal when Carmen spoke up, her voice gentle but clear. "Victor, this real estate project you mentioned, the one downtown, will it displace the families currently living there?" Victor paused mid-sentence, clearly not expecting the question. It's development, Mother. Progress. You wouldn't understand the complexities involved." "I understand that families need homes," Carmen replied simply. Victor's face reddened slightly. "You've never built anything," he said, his voice sharp with irritation. "You've never created jobs or contributed to economic growth. You wouldn't understand what it takes to succeed in the real world." Something inside me snapped. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor loud enough to turn heads at nearby tables. "She built me," I said, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She built a home when you walked away. She built a community of people who respect and love her. She built character in a grandson who knows the difference between success and worth." The Sterns looked intrigued for the first time all evening, their attention fully focused on our table. Carmen stood gracefully, her small frame somehow commanding the entire space. "You left to build a tower, Victor," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of disappointment. "I stayed to build a home." Victor's confident facade began to crack. "This is inappropriate," he muttered, glancing nervously at the Sterns. "What's inappropriate?" I continued, feeling strength flow through me. "Is inviting family to dinner just to humiliate them in front of your business associates. What's inappropriate is forgetting that the woman sitting next to you sacrificed everything to raise the son you abandoned." Dr. Stern leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "Mrs. Reyes, may I ask what kind of work you do?" Before Carmen could answer Dr. Stern's question, Victor signaled urgently for the server, clearly wanting to end the evening before it spiraled further out of his control. "Luis," he called, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, "could we have the check, please?" Luis approached our table with professional composure, carrying the leather booklet that contained our bill. But instead of placing it in front of Victor, as everyone expected, Luis walked directly to Carmen and set it gently beside her place setting. Victor laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. "Luis, there's been a mistake. The check goes to me." Luis looked at Victor with polite confusion. "I'm sorry, sir, but the lady already provided her card at the beginning of the evening. She requested that all charges be placed on her account." The table fell silent. Even the conversations at nearby tables seemed to pause, as if the entire restaurant sensed the shift in our dynamic. Victor's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, then something approaching panic. "Mother, that's not necessary. I invited everyone. I'm paying." Carmen opened the leather booklet calmly, as if she were examining a grocery receipt, rather than a bill that likely exceeded $2,000. She closed it with the same serene composure she brought to everything, then looked up at Victor with eyes that held no malice, only sadness. "It's already taken care of, Mijo," she said softly. Celeste's perfectly composed expression cracked for the first time all evening. She looked from Carmen to Victor to the bill, her mind clearly racing to process what had just happened. "But how did you—" Victor began, then stopped, perhaps realizing that any question he asked would only dig his hole deeper. Dr. Stern was watching the entire exchange with the focused attention of someone witnessing something significant. His wife Alicia had a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, as if she were enjoying a private joke. Alicia Stern leaned forward, her voice gentle but curious. "Carmen, may I ask what you do? I get the sense there's more to your story than we've heard." Carmen folded her hands in her lap, the same way she did when she was thinking about how to explain something complex in simple terms. "I sew," she said. "I save. And I don't talk much about either." I couldn't stay silent. The pride I felt for this woman, my grandmother, my anchor, my hero, was too strong to contain. "She's being modest," I said, looking directly at the Sterns. "Carmen owns 3 rental properties on the south side. She bought them over 30 years ago, fixed them up herself, and has been providing affordable housing to families ever since. She charges below market rate because she believes everyone deserves a safe place to live." Carmen's cheeks flushed slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "She worked 2 jobs for 15 years to put me through school," I continued. "She was a seamstress by day and cleaned office buildings at night. During the 2008 housing crisis, when people were losing their homes, she used her savings to help 6 families keep their houses. I only found out about it last year when one of them tracked me down to thank me for having such an amazing grandmother." Dr. Stern's expression had shifted completely. He was looking at Carmen not with polite interest, but with genuine respect. "6 families?" "7, Carmen corrected quietly. "Miguel forgot about the Gonzalez family." Alicia Stern reached across the table and gently touched Carmen's hand. "That's extraordinary. What kind of return on investment do you get from your rental properties?" Carmen looked confused by the question. "Return on investment?" "She means profit, abuela," I explained gently. "Oh," Carmen smiled. "I don't think about it that way. If my tenants are happy and their children are safe, that's my return." The contrast between Carmen's philosophy and Victor's business-first approach couldn't have been starker. Celeste looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair, while Victor stared at his mother, as if seeing her for the first time. "Mrs. Reyes," Dr. Stern said formally, "I think I speak for both my wife and myself when I say that you represent exactly the kind of community leadership we're looking for in our investment partners." Victor's head snapped up. "Investment partners?" "We're not just looking for financial returns," Alicia explained. "We want to work with people who understand that true wealth includes social responsibility. People who build communities, not just buildings." As the evening wound down, the Sterns lingered at the table longer than necessary, clearly more interested in continuing their conversation with Carmen than in discussing business with Victor. "Mrs. Reyes," Dr. Stern said as they prepared to leave, "would you be interested in meeting with us next week? We're developing a fund specifically for community-focused housing initiatives. Your experience and perspective would be invaluable." Carmen looked surprised. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean." "We're looking for local partners who understand community needs," Alicia explained. "People who have actually done the work, not just talked about it." As they exchanged business cards, I noticed Victor and Celeste standing awkwardly to the side, clearly realizing that the evening had not gone according to their plan. When the Sterns finally said their goodbyes, their warm appreciation for Carmen stood in stark contrast to their polite but cool farewell to Victor. Luis appeared one final time as we prepared to leave. He handed me a receipt, but when I looked at it, I saw that the tip line had already been filled in, and generously. "Everything has been taken care of," he said quietly. "And Mrs. Reyes, thank you for everything." Carmen smiled and replied in Spanish, "Cuídate, mijo." Study hard. Luis's eyes lit up with surprise and gratitude. "Sí, señora, I will." Outside the restaurant, as we waited for the valet to bring our car, Victor finally approached us. He looked older somehow, as if the evening had aged him. "Mother," he began, his voice uncertain, "I didn't know. I never realized." Carmen looked at him with the same gentle sadness she'd carried all evening. "You never asked, Victor. You were so busy becoming successful that you forgot to notice who was already successful around you." Our Honda Civic arrived, looking even more humble next to the string of luxury cars being delivered to other guests. But as I helped Carmen into the passenger seat, I felt a pride deeper than anything Victor's wealth could buy. "You didn't just pay for the meal tonight, Abuela," I said as we drove away from the glittering downtown. "You owned that room." Back at our modest apartment, Carmen hung her shawl carefully in the closet and put on her comfortable slippers. The contrast between the opulent restaurant and our simple home felt stark, but somehow our apartment felt richer now, filled with the truth of who we really were. I sat at our small kitchen table, sketching preliminary designs for the community center project I'd mentioned at dinner. The passion that had felt diminished by Victor's dismissive comments now burned brighter than ever. Carmen made tea, humming softly as she moved around the kitchen with the same grace she'd shown all evening. When she brought me a cup, I looked up from my drawings. "Abuela, do you regret it? Not showing off more over the years? Not letting people know what you've accomplished?" She settled into the chair across from me, cradling her teacup in both hands. "Mijo, real power doesn't ask to be seen, it just shows up when it's needed." I thought about Luis's story, about the family she'd helped, about the quiet dignity she'd maintained, even when Victor tried to humiliate her. "The Sterns want to work with you." "I know," she said, taking a sip of her tea. "Maybe it's time to show up a little more. There are communities that need help, and if God has given me the resources to help them..." She shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I reached across the table and took her weathered hand in mine. "I'm proud to be your grandson." "And I'm proud to be your abuela," she replied. "You stood up for me tonight, but more importantly, you stood up for what's right. That's worth more than all the money Victor will ever make." Later that evening, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Dr. Stern. "Miguel, I wanted to thank you and your grandmother for an enlightening evening. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss potential partnership opportunities. Also, I thought you should know, we've decided not to move forward with your father's proposal. We prefer to work with people who understand that true success is measured by the lives we touch, not the profits we accumulate." I showed the message to Carmen, who read it carefully and then handed the phone back to me. "What goes around comes around," she said simply. "Your father chose his path long ago. Tonight, he had to walk it to its end." As I turned off the lights and prepared for bed, I thought about legacy, real legacy, not the kind that gets announced in toasts at expensive restaurants, but the kind that gets whispered in grateful prayers by families who found help when they needed it most. Not the kind that impresses potential investors, but the kind that changes lives, one person at a time. In the darkness of my room, I could hear Carmen moving quietly around the apartment, checking locks and turning off lights, the same nighttime routine she'd followed for as long as I could remember. It was the sound of home, of safety, of unconditional love. Tomorrow I would continue working on my community center project. Carmen would probably receive a call from the Sterns about their housing initiative. And somewhere across town, Victor would have to figure out how to rebuild not just his business prospects, but his understanding of what it truly means to be successful. But tonight, I fell asleep grateful for the woman who had raised me, who had taught me that the most profound victories are won not with grand gestures but with quiet dignity, not with loud proclamations but with consistent kindness, and that the richest people in the world are often those who have learned to give their wealth away. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.